To just get us started, I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about the inspiration for You Can Die Properly Now, and maybe also just who this you is that the title refers to.
You Can Die Properly Now was composed for a specific concert with Orchestra Symphonique de Montréal, which will happen at the end of May here in Montreal. And the central piece for this concert is Song of the Earth, or Mahler's monumental piece. The initial idea was to pair 2 or 3 Canadian new works with this piece, which is related to the songs from the earth and from another culture. So we're talking about Oriental texts, and we're talking about connection with Mahler to the earth and to its singing, of course. So the idea was to work with one Indigenous composer, which I'm not. It's Ian Cousin, my colleague. They asked me if I will be interested to join. Of course, in this very busy period, I accepted it because I could choose to write only a very short piece, but also because the thematic is something which is very important for me. And all these questionings about the land, what is the land and how the land is related to us, and is it related to us, and in which sense? I was born in Eastern Europe, in the land of Yugoslavia, which doesn't exist anymore, but now my land is Serbia. So all this is very appealing and very important questions I'm asking to myself all the time. But also there is different kind of land, and there is also the nourishing land, and then there is also the inspirational land, and there is many other aspects which were interesting for me. So for this project, I proposed to work with my friend, I can say my first Indigenous friend, and she's a poet, but also sculptor, and also photographer from Nova Scotia. Her name is Michelle Sylliboy. We have exactly the same age, and we met a few years ago around a mentoring project in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. We stayed in touch, and we really started to develop a friendship. And through the friendship, I understood many, many things, many interesting things about her past, about her reality and reality of her nation, and my reality, which were completely opposed. I arrived here in the 90s as an immigrant during the absurd civil war in Yugoslavia. And I was integrated, accepted, welcomed here greatly in the beginning of 90s. So my perspective to Canada is not the same as her perspective of Canada. And it was a very interesting conversation about this land and this perspective. And of course, I asked her if she could be interested to write me a short text for this piece. And she came up with this idea. And I absolutely loved it. And that's what we are going to premiere in 2 months.
Can you talk maybe a little bit about the relationship between these ideas of land and of connection to land and sort of human life and death? You know, if that's something that's present in this piece. I guess I'm just sort of thinking about die is quite a sort of shocking word to see in the title of a piece. And I'm wondering how that plays into these themes of land and belonging.
What is important is that this text was starting point in all senses, in musical and semiotical, because there is the force and the delicatesse at the same time in the same text. And it was written and it will be sung in Mi'kmaq language, which was for me another challenge. This is another thing to talk about. But first of all, let's say that this language is extremely musical. But it's difficult, of course, because we don't have any contacts in putting in music into the Western context of this language. But also the language has different dialects, and it's not easy, even for Michelle Sylliboy, to transmit all subtleties written in English in a syllable lines. So we had these kind of issues and challenges, but all these challenges were actually very interesting because we were almost like archaeologists, working on these subjects. So I wanted, first of all, to respect the language musical language, to do all rhythmicality which it needs to stay in its original. Of course, the beauty of this text, which is talking about children which were found in the graves, massive graves, recently in the last few years, and we are continuing to finding them. So the kids which were buried there, killed, these horror stories of our past is terrible. But in the text of Michel Sylliboy, we don't see any rage. The text is full of huge, grand force, but spirituality and tenderness for these children who disappeared. The text is more listen to us, talk to us, be in contact with us, and almost in a way of a lullaby, talking to these children and allowing now, when we know where they are, that they can die properly now.
When you're working with a language that you're not familiar with, I mean, it sounds like this relationship that you have with Michelle was hugely helpful, but where do you start in terms of determining the musicality of the language? And I guess also, how different is that from composing a piece of untexted music?
Of course, it's completely different. When we have text, we're related to that text. We're related to its meaning, and we want to put all justice to this text, if I can say in that way. So even if we speak the language or we understand the language, we will take care about understanding of these words or how these words could inspire music, that music at the end could tell the story, because it's music. So it's not the text who's telling the story, it's the music which is telling the story, but inspired by that text. In this case, with Mi'kmaq language, where I don't speak the language and when I don't understand the language, the first thing for me is to listen to it several times to see its musicality, its rhythmicality. And then what is important, of course, is to respect all tonic accents, which should be in the right place. So these technical, which are technical but very musical, are for me very important. And then I start to have these melodic lines or more rhythmical lines or more, I will see if I will go more syllabic or more melismatic, and how orchestra is there, and etc., thinking about also whole concept of the concert. And then in this case, Michelle was available, so I went to her several times with many questions, but also with many proposals, and she told me what she thought. We worked from the beginning with amazing and young singer, Mi'kmaq singer, Emma Pennell, who had a beautiful, powerful voice and willingness to sing this piece. But she herself does not speak the language. So it was also for her very important to speak the language of her ancestors. So she was very much working with us. It's a 4 minute piece, but I will tell you that the work was really, really very, very long. The process was very, very long.
I'm curious to talk more about that process and about the experience of sort of writing with voices or players in mind, like I was saying. But before we do, I want to just touch on one more thing to do with this sort of idea of, technical concerns and then also musicality and how they work together or sometimes, at odds. As a composer, practically speaking, of course, you're responsible for the musical score for this material object of music. But when it's received by audiences, it's something mutable and changeable. That's your score, but then all these different things. So I guess I'm curious as to where you see your job beginning and ending, and what you understand your responsibility to be in the context of a premiere like this in the rehearsal room when a work is being done for the first time. How specific are you with the instructions you give to your premiering performers, and how much do you sort of want to leave it to them to take this off the page?
Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting question. And you know what? I'm thinking about these questions a lot. Everything starts from the piece itself and from its reception. I'm receiving the piece. I'm listening to the piece before I composed it. maybe not in all its details, but the color of it, the sense of it, the sensation of it, I already listened to it before I start to even write a piece. So this process is about abstraction. Music is abstract, the most abstract of all arts. And when I think about a piece, it's something as a magma in my head, shaped abstractions and colored abstractions, which start to be concrete in a moment when I realized that I should write a score, because living people, I'm always writing instrumental music or vocal instrumental music. So I'm not doing any electronics, which is another way of doing this abstraction. But in my way, I had to really put all this music into very concrete signs, and which we all universally can read as notes, and all these Italian forms or Italian vocabulary we use. This is very difficult because you have to put something which is abstract in something which is very concrete. But then the performers, they're watching it and they start to work on it and they start to understand it and they perform it. When they perform it, this music reaches our abstraction from the beginning. If it was clear in our head what we wanted to do and it was clearly written on the paper, and then the performers which read it understood it. Even of all these connections to the abstraction, this is very interesting. If I doubt of one moment while writing, but at that moment I don't have any better solution, it could be half of a bar, and I leave it there, and I speak with the musicians when they receive the score, and if I ask them, do you have any questions? They will point at this part of the bar and say, I understand everything, but not this. So this is, for me, mystery of connection, because these signs are just saying something, but we know what it is all about. So there are three ingredients for music. It's, of course, the idea. It's a composer, performer, and audience. Because if we don't hear the music, if we don't receive all this beautiful magical circle, the piece doesn't exist.
So when that happens in the context of a new work, when a composition goes to your performers and they identify those spots, what happens from there? They identify those spots that maybe were question marks in your mind.
I will try to correct them, to be more precise. My final versions of the piece are after the premiere, because the performer is influencing, in my case, a lot. I try to find a common ground between the performers and my sensibility. I'm interested in many things, performers also, but where we can find the best ground to share it together and to work together. So this is kind of my obsession, and I'm always very interested in having this conversation and in talking with the performers before I start to write a piece.
Right. And then it sounds like in talking to them, as that piece is being written and once it's been heard by people already. So then in the rehearsal room, what shape does that take? Are you, as involved as maybe the conductor in giving rehearsal notes, or do you sort of take a back seat and wait till it's been premiered? How does that process transpire when you're involved?
I want and hope to have enough rehearsal time to experiment things which we need. The most complicated things are orchestra, and we know how to deal with it, with whom to talk, with the conductor, at which moment to talk, because the time is so limited that we know in advance that we cannot do much. We can do some things, but the very specific things, and we say after the first rehearsal or during the first rehearsal, we're starting really from urgent things which are concerning the tempo or some very important spirit elements, etc. And then we can go to the details as we can. The less actually instruments we have, the most time we have to spend with them. And we can go really to more details when the pieces are written for less instruments.
We've already, now talked about the way that you like to let individual performers' voices and playing influence your writing. Has that always been the case in your career, or is that something that you've become, increasingly interested in, or has it changed the way that you think about how much to let performers into that process?
Oh, I like to work with people. I really like collaborations, and I'm inspired by them. And I'm inspired with conductors, and even with the orchestra, where sometimes the 12th second violin is like very shy somewhere. I think about them as a people, and I know that my score will be read by people, by real humans. So this connection is so important for me. And sometimes I go a little bit too much. I'm changing all the time my scores accordingly to different presentations, different collaborations, because they're not two same violinists. Sometimes I will even have this tendency to adjust too much, all the time. But this is just because I am inspired by, and performers are so into it. They're so interested in being part of the creation. They're not an instrument in a sense that they're not in a musical instrument in that sense, but they're just not the performers. They want to bring their signature. And this I respect a lot, and I always try to find place for them. Even though I don't improvise, I don't leave them in my music space for improvisation, but the space for understanding and the space for interpretation is there.
It sounds like commitment to dialogue in the creative process,
It
which I
is.
think is quite amazing. I should have revealed myself earlier. I myself am a classical singer, and I've done a little bit of new music work the last sort of 8 months or year or so. And I find it so exhilarating to be invited into that part of creation. And to exactly your point, it's a very affirming experience to sort of be led in at that stage of a work.
Oh, this is amazing. This is really amazing. You continue to be curious because you can dialogue with the living composers, You can, of course, do the interpretation of the repertoire, which is amazing, and you have to do it. But what is nice with the creation is that you know that how many pieces, how many roles were changed accordingly to the singers or to the musicians. You know about Mozart, his versions, because the tenor was not the same, or the singer. So he changed the roles. This is how it goes. We are inspired by you.
And likewise, it's a super interesting dynamic. I think it's really fascinating. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about it the way that you've explained. I do want to talk a little bit about the experience of being a female composer and the challenges that come with just that very fact. And we could talk all day about, the uphill battle required of female composers, both living and dead, in classical music to get their works on concert programs. As I was sort of thinking about this conversation, a number of questions related to this theme came up for me, but possibly the one that stood out the most was, I'm curious how you identify, in an age where we're becoming increasingly aware of the hurdles and the gaps between female and male composers, how do you identify between genuine interest in the quality and the artistic value of your music from presenting organizations and sort of tokenizing efforts to balance season programming by including, a quota of pieces by a female composer? And I'm wondering if this is something that you think about when you're approached about your work at all.
Mm-hmm. I'm just dreaming about where we'll not talk about it, but it will be completely normal that we have female composers or female anything, in the world working the job and just doing your competent work for whatever you are doing. I know that we have to talk about quotas and talk about these things because they're still not, we're still thinking about it, and there is a lackness in many jobs in the world where the women are not enough because of their sex. So I was thinking about the art history and music history, and knowing that so many composers, female composers, couldn't write or wrote under a male's name, etc. It's really incredible. It's so sad for them. I was raised in communist regime of ex-Yugoslavia, where we didn't have really these differences of male and females in very important structural positions anywhere. You could have the engineers women, you can have school directors women, and the three most important Serbian composers, avant-garde composers, one was woman. So it was I had these models around me and I didn't think about it. We never thought about it. In schools, many female composers, students. Then I came to Canada and then it became very fashionable to talk about women. So women were pushed, encouraged to compose. So actually, it was a good time for me. But I'm always conscious about the problem. And I always dream that one time soon, we'll just not talk about this, that we will just talk about music.
Totally. What do you understand to be your role in getting us there, in getting us to a place where we just talk about the quality of music and the creativity of music and not about who wrote it or why?
Just listen to music, give the access of new music or of music to the audience. That's what we need. That's it. If we have access to the pieces and if we have enough of these pieces and of this music, of course, and then you know what? Time will pronounce. We don't know what will happen in the future, but access is the most important thing.